Hello, and welcome back to Amplified History, a podcast about the long, strange, loud, and occasionally legally complicated history of rock and roll. I'm Robert. In our last episode, we followed the explosion from 1954 to 1957. Bill Haley, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Bo Diddley, Carl Perkins, Sun Records, rockabilly, screaming teenagers, nervous adults, and the heroic defense of blue suede footwear. Ms. Harris also informed us that the ghosts of several early musicians had retained legal counsel. I have since received a letter written on paper that smells faintly of jukebox dust. Before we continue, please like the episode and subscribe to the podcast. That helps new listeners find the series, and it ensures that you'll be here for the next chapter. Today, we're moving from 1957 to 1960. These are years of tremendous creativity, but also disruption. Rock and roll grows, softens, fractures, survives scandal, absorbs tragedy, and starts to look different from the wild first wave. We'll talk about Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, the Everly Brothers, Ritchie Valens, Doo-wop, teen idols, payola, television, harmony, heartbreak, and the uneasy question of whether the music business can take something dangerous and place it politely inside a cardigan. To guide us through all of this, I'm joined once again by Ms. Harris, historian, record collector, curator of the Backbeat Basement Archive, and the only person I know who owns a carbon-dated comb allegedly recovered from the remains of a pompadour.
Hello, Roberts. The comb is in a climate-controlled display case.
Of course it is.
We do not take follicular history lightly.
Any ghost activity this week?
One complaint from a backing vocalist who says the reverb is still too low.
Can we fix it?
Not without a seance and a mixing console.
Then let's proceed carefully. Last episode ended with rock and roll looking unstoppable. Elvis was on television. Chuck Berry was writing miniature movies about teenagers. Little Richard sounded like a piano had been struck by lightning. What changes after 1957?
The music keeps moving, but the first wave begins to encounter pressure. Some artists face scandal, some leave the stage, some die tragically young. The music industry also tries to package rock and roll more safely for mainstream audiences.
So this is not the death of rock and roll.
No, but it is a turning point. Between 1957 and 1960, the sound becomes more varied. You still hear raw rockabilly, rhythm and blues, and explosive piano records, but you also hear polished vocal harmony, teen ballads, novelty songs, pop-oriented productions, and a new generation of carefully managed stars.
Which means rock and roll does what successful cultural movements often do. It multiplies.
Exactly. Once a sound becomes popular, everyone has an opinion about what it should become next.
The musicians, the audience, the record labels, the broadcasters, the parents,
The cardigan manufacturers.
an overlooked stakeholder.
Cardigans were waiting patiently for their moment.
But before we get to safer television idols, we need to talk about someone who was not especially interested in safety.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jerry Lee Lewis enters the story from Sun Records.
Yes, like Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis recorded at Sun in Memphis. He was from Louisiana, and he brought together country music, gospel, rhythm and blues, and boogie-woogie piano.
His breakthrough came with Whole Lotta Shakin' Goin' On in 1957.
Correct. And then came Great Balls of Fire, also in 1957. Those records sound as though someone has placed a piano in the path of an oncoming train and invited the pianist to negotiate.
Jerry Lee Lewis did not negotiate.
No, he attacked the instrument. His left hand drove the rhythm, his right hand added flourishes and accents. He could stand up, kick back the piano stool, and perform as though the instrument had personally insulted him.
When people describe early rock and roll, The electric guitar often dominates the image. But Jerry Lee Lewis reminds us that a piano can be every bit as dangerous.
Absolutely. In his hands, the piano is not furniture. It is an emergency.
An emergency with 88 keys.
And no visible safety officer.
The stool has left the premises. The instrument is under attack. Several adults are reconsidering their life choices.
Which is exactly why the records still sound alive. The performance feels uncontrolled, even when the musician is actually in command.
There is gospel intensity in his playing.
Very much so. Jerry Lee grew up around religious music, and that background remained audible in his performance. But he also experienced conflict over playing secular music. You can hear a tension between sacred intensity and worldly subject matter.
And then his career hits a major scandal.
Yes, in 1958, during a tour of Britain, it became public that Jerry Lee Lewis had married his young cousin. The backlash was immediate. The tour collapsed, and his career suffered badly.
It is difficult to discuss this lightly.
It should not be discussed lightly. The scandal was serious, and the public response was enormous. His records remained influential, but his mainstream momentum was badly damaged.
So one of rock and roll's brightest early stars suddenly becomes a cautionary story.
Exactly. The music business was already learning how quickly a public image could change.
And the larger pattern begins to emerge. The first wave is not simply climbing upward, it is being interrupted.
Yes, some interruptions are self-inflicted. Others are tragic. Others are the result of industry pressure. But together, they create the feeling that the first explosion is beginning to lose its center.
Let's turn to Buddy Holly.
Buddy Holly is one of the most important figures in this period.
And he looked different from the standard image of the rock and roll rebel.
He did. He wore glasses. He looked thoughtful, almost studious. But that image can be misleading if it makes us underestimate the music. Buddy Holly was innovative, rhythmically sharp, melodically inventive, and deeply influential.
He came from Lubbock, Texas.
Yes, he absorbed country, rhythm and blues, and rock and roll. With the Crickets, he recorded That'll Be the Day, which became a major hit in 1957.
What should listeners notice in that recording?
The guitar rhythm, the vocal phrasing, the economy of the arrangement, and the way everything feels tightly constructed without becoming stiff. Buddy Holly's records often sound clean and direct, but never bland.
He also helped establish the idea of the self-contained rock band.
That's important. The Crickets had a model that later bands would study. Guitar, rhythm guitar, bass, drums, vocals, a recognizable group identity, and songs closely associated with the performers themselves.
The name also sounds like a band name in the way later listeners understand band names.
Yes, the Crickets inspired later musicians, including groups in Britain. There is a famous line of influence from insect-themed band names to another insect-themed band name.
Are you referring to?
I am referring to the Beatles.
We will reach them soon enough.
Buddy Holly also experimented in the studio. He used overdubbing and explored different arrangements. His songs showed that rock and roll could be concise, melodic, emotionally direct, and structurally clever.
There's an intimacy to his singing.
Yes, he could sound vulnerable without becoming weak. His vocal hiccups and phrasing became instantly recognizable. Later musicians imitated them constantly.
The glasses became part of the iconography too.
They did. Buddy Holly expanded the idea of what a rock and roll star could look like. You did not need to resemble a movie rebel. You could look like the person who had arrived early to repair the projector and then quietly write a perfect song.
The revenge of the responsible student.
Exactly.
Another essential part of the late 1950s is harmony. The Everly Brothers bring that into focus.
Don and Phil Everly were extraordinary singers. Their close harmonies drew from country traditions, but their records also fit beautifully into the emerging rock and roll and pop landscape.
Bye Bye Love became a major hit in 1957.
Yes, Then came Wake Up Little Susie, also in 1957, and All I Have to Do Is Dream in 1958.
All I Have to Do Is Dream sounds almost weightless.
It does. The harmonies are beautifully blended. The song is simple, but it creates an atmosphere immediately. The Everly Brothers showed that rock-era music could be soft, melodic, and emotionally powerful without losing connection to the world of teenagers.
So not every important development requires a screaming saxophone or a piano stool leaving the ground.
Correct, though both remain welcome under controlled conditions.
The harmonies become hugely influential later.
Extremely influential. The Beatles, the Beach Boys, Simon and Garfunkel, and many others listened closely to the Everly Brothers. Two voices moving together can create emotional complexity that a solo voice cannot.
What made the harmonies feel so distinctive?
Partly the sibling blend. Their voices had a natural relationship, but it was also technique, phrasing, timing, tone, and the emotional shape of the songs. They could sound innocent and melancholy at the same time.
Which may be the official emotional temperature of adolescence.
That is an excellent definition.
Wake Up Little Susie also caused some controversy.
Yes, the song tells the story of a young couple who fall asleep at a movie and wake up late, worried about what people will think. The lyrics are innocent enough, but some listeners heard implication and scandal.
Once again, adults demonstrate extraordinary imagination when searching for reasons to worry about teenagers.
They were highly trained specialists.
We have to talk about doo-wop.
Absolutely. Doo-wop was one of the defining vocal styles of the 1950s and early 1960s. It drew from rhythm and blues, gospel, and vocal harmony traditions. Groups created rich arrangements with lead singers, backing vocals, repeated syllables, and a strong sense of atmosphere.
The name itself comes from the kinds of syllables backing singers might use.
Yes, those syllables could create rhythm, harmony, and texture. The human voice became the entire architecture of the song.
And the image of teenagers singing on street corners is not entirely fictional.
No, vocal groups could rehearse in hallways, on sidewalks, in school spaces, or anywhere with useful acoustics. You did not necessarily need expensive equipment to begin. You needed voices, discipline, and the ability to keep your place while someone else was singing a completely different part beside you.
Which sounds difficult.
It is. Great vocal harmony often sounds effortless because the performers have done a great deal of work.
Who should listeners know?
The Platters, the Drifters, the Coasters, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, the Chantels, the Flamingos, and many others. Some groups leaned toward rhythm and blues. Some reached pop audiences. Some songs were playful. Others were deeply romantic.
The Coasters brought humor into the mix.
Yes, songs such as Yakety Yak turned teenage conflict into comic theater. The parent says, "Clean your room, take out the trash, do the chores." The teenager replies,
Don't talk back.
"Exactly."
Rock and roll had discovered the domestic argument.
One of the most durable genres in recorded history.
And then there are records like the Flamingos' I Only Have Eyes for You.
That recording is extraordinary. The atmosphere feels dreamlike. The backing vocals seem to float. It is romantic, but slightly uncanny, as though the singers have found a doorway into another dimension and decided to harmonize there.
Backbeat Basement Archive Supernatural Classification.
Mildly haunted, safe for public listening.
Another artist whose story is both inspiring and painfully brief is Ritchie Valens.
Yes, Ritchie Valens was a Mexican-American musician from California. His professional career lasted only a short time, but his impact was enormous.
He recorded Come On, Let's Go, Donna, and La Bamba.
Correct. La Bamba is particularly important because it adapted a traditional Mexican folk song into a rock and roll recording.
Which made the cultural exchange visible in a new way.
Exactly. Rock and roll had never belonged to one single tradition, but La Bamba made that hybridity unmistakable. Valens sang in Spanish, played with rock and roll energy, and created a record that still feels immediate.
He was only 17 when he died.
Yes, In February 1959, Ritchie Valens died in a plane crash along with Buddy Holly and J.P. Richardson, known as the Big Bopper. The pilot also died.
That event became one of the defining tragedies of early rock and roll.
It did. Years later, Don McLean's song American Pie referred to it as the day the music died. That phrase became widely associated with the crash.
But of course, the music did not literally die.
No, rock and roll continued. New artists emerged, existing artists evolved, but the crash became symbolic because several young musicians died at once, and because Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens seemed to have so much more music ahead of them.
What is striking about Ritchie Valens is the speed of the story. A teenager records a handful of songs, adapts a Mexican folk song into a rock and roll classic, and leaves a permanent mark on popular music before most people have finished deciding what they want to do with their lives.
Exactly. La Bamba is joyful, energetic, and culturally important. It shows that rock and roll was already broader than the simplified version of the story.
And it is impossible to hear the record now without thinking about everything he might have done next.
Yes, the song feels alive. The tragedy is knowing how much future was still waiting for him.
Buddy Holly was only 22.
Yes, his death created a huge sense of loss. He had already written and recorded influential music, but he was still developing rapidly.
Do we risk turning tragedy into mythology?
We do. It is important to remember the musicians as artists, not just as symbols of lives cut short. Listen to the records, hear the craft. The tragedy matters, but it should not replace the music.
That is a good principle. While some parts of rock and roll remain raw and unpredictable, the industry starts developing a smoother version.
Yes, by the late 1950s, labels, managers, television shows, and promoters understood the value of teenage audiences. They also understood that some adults wanted a less threatening version of youth culture.
Enter the teen idol.
Exactly. Attractive young singers with carefully managed images, polished performances, and songs designed for broad appeal. Some were talented performers. Some were manufactured more heavily. But the key point is that the music industry learned to package rebellion in a form that could be introduced to your parents.
Rebellion with a comb, a smile, and a scheduled television appearance.
Rebellion that would arrive at the studio on time.
Who are we talking about?
Singers such as Frankie Avalon, Fabian, Bobby Rydell, and others. Their music often leaned toward pop. The sound could be pleasant, catchy, and much less threatening than early Little Richard or Jerry Lee Lewis.
This is where some histories say rock and roll became tame.
There is some truth in that, but we should avoid oversimplifying. Popular music was not one thing. Even while teen idols appeared on television, rhythm and blues continued evolving. Doo-wop flourished. Girl groups would soon become important. Soul music was developing. Surf music was around the corner. The British were listening carefully.
The British are becoming increasingly suspicious in this story.
They are taking notes.
But the safer packaging changes the public image.
It does. Rock and roll becomes less shocking, partly because it becomes familiar. Once a dangerous sound appears in enough living rooms, it begins to lose some of its power to frighten.
Unless the living room contains a piano and Jerry Lee Lewis.
Then the insurance policy changes.
How important was television by this point?
Increasingly important. Television could create national visibility almost instantly. Programs such as American Bandstand brought music and dancing into homes across the country.
Dick Clark became one of the central figures.
Yes, American Bandstand presented youth culture in a controlled, accessible form. Teenagers danced, artists appeared, records gained exposure. The show helped shape what a national teenage audience saw and heard.
This is a major shift from the jukebox in a local diner.
It is. Radio and jukeboxes remain crucial, but television adds a visual dimension. The hairstyle, clothing, choreography, and facial expressions matter more than ever.
The cardigan manufacturers are celebrating.
Quarterly results are strong.
But the machinery of promotion also leads to the payola scandal.
Yes, Payola refers to payments or other incentives used to influence radio airplay without proper disclosure. The practice became a major public controversy around the end of the 1950s.
Why did it matter so much?
Because radio airplay could make a record successful, a song heard repeatedly had a huge advantage. If payments shaped those decisions secretly, then audiences were not simply hearing what disc jockeys genuinely recommended.
Alan Freed becomes a central figure in the scandal.
He does. Freed had helped popularize rock and roll, but his career was badly damaged by payola investigations. Dick Clark was also questioned, though his career survived.
So the scandal was partly about ethics, but also about control.
Absolutely. The music business was changing rapidly, and everyone wanted to understand who had influence. Which records became hits? Who selected them? Who benefited financially? Who decided what reached teenagers?
And, as always, where money flows, ghosts eventually file complaints.
The ghosts have requested a forensic accountant.
By 1959 or 1960, someone looking at the first wave could see a troubling pattern.
Yes, Elvis Presley had entered the Army in 1958. Little Richard stepped away from secular music for a time. Jerry Lee Lewis was damaged by scandal. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper died in the plane crash. Chuck Berry faced legal trouble. Alan Freed's career collapsed amid payola controversy.
That is a lot of disruption in a short period.
It is, and the mainstream charts often sounded more polished. Teen idols and pop ballads became prominent. Some observers concluded that rock and roll had been contained.
Was it?
Not remotely, it was changing location.
Meaning?
The raw materials were still everywhere. Rhythm and blues continued evolving. Gospel influence continued feeding soul music. Vocal groups flourished. Young musicians in Britain were obsessively collecting American records. Garage bands were forming. Guitarists were studying Chuck Berry. Singers were studying Little Richard. Songwriters were studying Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers.
So the first wave appears to recede, but it leaves a vast amount of energy behind.
Exactly. The next explosion will not look identical to the first one.
By 1960, someone could look at the headlines and decide that rock and roll had been tamed. Elvis was in the Army. Little Richard had stepped away. Jerry Lee Lewis had scandal. Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens were gone.
But the music had not disappeared. It had changed location.
Changed location?
The records were traveling. Teenagers in Britain were listening. Garage bands were forming. Guitarists were learning Chuck Berry riffs. Singers were studying Little Richard. The first wave had not ended the story. It had taught the next wave how to begin.
That is a useful way to see the period, not as an ending, but as a transfer of energy.
Exactly. Music history is full of moments that appear quiet, only because the next movement is rehearsing somewhere out of sight.
It's time for 5 records for the road. As always, these songs are not a ranking, and they are not the only important records from the period. They are 5 useful doors into the years from 1957 to 1960. Links to all 5 songs are available in the episode description, so you can listen after the show and hear the details for yourself.
Preferably through speakers that are not structurally attached to a shared wall.
A message brought to you by our legal department.
And several neighbors.
First, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, That'll Be the Day, from 1957.
Listen to the guitar rhythm, the vocal phrasing, and the compact arrangement. Everything feels purposeful. Buddy Holly makes the record sound casual, but the construction is precise.
Second, Jerry Lee Lewis, Great Balls of Fire, from 1957.
Listen to the piano attack, the momentum, and the vocal intensity. It is less a song than a controlled electrical event.
Controlled?
Mostly controlled.
Third, the Everly Brothers, All I Have to Do Is Dream, from 1958.
Listen to the harmony blend. Notice how the two voices create a sense of longing without overcomplicating anything. It is elegant, direct, and deeply influential.
Fourth, Ritchie Valens, La Bamba, from 1958.
Listen to the energy and the cultural layering. A traditional Mexican folk song becomes a rock and roll record, and the result still sounds immediate.
Fifth, The Flamingos, I Only Have Eyes for You, from 1959.
Listen to the atmosphere. The backing voices create a floating, dreamlike sound. It is romantic, strange, and beautiful.
5 songs, 5 different emotional worlds.
And another reminder that late 1950s rock and roll was not one narrow style. It could attack a piano, drift through a dream, blend two voices perfectly, or transform a folk song.
Additional listening?
Gladly. The Coasters, Yakety Yak. Buddy Holly, Peggy Sue. The Everly Brothers, Wake Up Little Susie. Ritchie Valens, Donna. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? The Chantels, Maybe. Jerry Lee Lewis, Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On.
The episode description is once again becoming a small public library.
Libraries are good.
Let's take a step back. Episode 1 was about the roots. Episode 2 was about the explosion. What is episode 3 really about?
It's about survival through change.
Explain.
The first stars of rock and roll do not remain frozen in place. Some careers collapse, some musicians die, some performers move away from the style. The industry tries to make the music safer, but the underlying ideas continue spreading.
The backbeat spreads.
The backbeat spreads, the guitar language spreads, the vocal intensity spreads, the harmonies spread, the songwriting spreads, the teenage audience remains, and the records travel farther than anyone can control.
Including across the Atlantic.
Especially across the Atlantic.
The British are still taking notes.
They have acquired guitars.
That sounds serious.
It becomes serious in episode 4.
Before we preview that, let's talk about something Buddy Holly represents. The songwriter as band member.
Yes, Buddy Holly's model becomes crucial. Later bands will not only perform songs, they will write, arrange, and develop a group identity. That idea is already visible in Holly's work.
And the Everly Brothers shape harmony.
Exactly. Later groups will build on that. Then, Doo-wop contributes vocal textures and emotional language. Ritchie Valens broadens the cultural picture. Jerry Lee Lewis demonstrates that performance itself can become spectacle.
So even in a period that some people misremember as a low, the foundations are being strengthened.
Yes, the surface looks calmer in places. Underneath, the structure is expanding.
Next time, we move into the early 1960s and follow the music across the Atlantic.
The story becomes international in a new way. British teenagers had been listening to American rock and roll, blues, rhythm and blues, and skiffle. They formed bands. They copied records. They learned chords. They practiced in bedrooms, clubs, and basements.
Skiffle deserves a quick explanation.
Skiffle was a British craze drawing from American folk, blues, and jazz traditions. It could be played with simple instruments, which made it accessible to young people. You did not need an expensive setup to begin.
So skiffle becomes a gateway.
Exactly. A young musician could start with a guitar and a few chords, then move toward rock and roll. Soon we get the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Animals, the Kinks, and many others.
We will also need to talk about American music during the same period.
Absolutely. Motown, girl groups, surf music, brill-building songwriting, soul, and other developments. The British invasion does not replace American music. It enters an already changing landscape.
And then adult composure collapses again.
Dramatically.
With better television lighting.
And more hair.
I knew the hair would return. Ms. Harris, before we go, what should listeners carry away from this episode?
The end of the 1950s was not the end of rock and roll. It was a period of transition. Buddy Holly helped shape the future of the rock band. Jerry Lee Lewis showed how explosive a performance could be. The Everly Brothers demonstrated the power of harmony. Ritchie Valens expanded the cultural possibilities of the music. Doo-wop turned vocal arrangement into atmosphere. Television and radio changed the machinery of popularity.
And the first wave left lessons everywhere.
Exactly. The stars changed. The energy remained.
Thank you, Ms. Harris.
Thank you, Robert.
Any final message from the Backbeat Basement Archive?
Yes, the carbon-dated Pompadour comb has requested its own display lighting.
Does the comb have a budget?
The comb has representation.
Naturally.
The ghost recommended an agent.
Thank you for listening to Amplified History. Links to the 5 featured songs are available in the episode description. Listen closely, compare the styles, and hear how many futures were already hiding inside these records. If you enjoyed the episode, please like it, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with someone who owns a guitar, a cardigan, or a suspiciously well-preserved pompadour.
The calm is listening.
Next time, the British invasion, American sounds crossing the Atlantic and returning with new accents. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Animals, Motown, girl groups, surf music, and the second collapse of adult composure. Until then, keep the volume just slightly unreasonable.